I had 40 million in my account, but I kept it a secret. My children treated me like a beggar while spoiling my former rival, their stepfather. They mocked my humble life, unaware of my true strength, and then, at their bankruptcy hearing, I revealed the truth about who the real owner of their homes was. This moment shocked everyone, and the consequences were inevitable. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening in the comments.
God, what a rust bucket!
Lindsay sneered as she stepped out of her sleek sedan, eyeing my 1998 Chevrolet Malibu with the same disgust she'd reserved for roadkill. The evening light caught the fresh scratches on the passenger door, battle scars from the used car lot where I'd bought it that morning. Charlie emerged from the driver's side, shaking his head. "You're such a beggar, Dad. Our stepdad just got a new BMW, silver leather seats, the works, and you're out here celebrating this." I forced a smile, wiping my hands on the kitchen towel I'd been holding.
Come on in, kids.
"Dinner's ready. I made your favorite meatloaf and mashed potatoes."
Meatloaf? Lindsay's voice dripped with mockery.
"When was the last time you had a decent meal? Richard took us to that new steakhouse downtown last week. $100 steaks, imported wine." They followed me into the small kitchen where I'd set the table with my best plates, the ones their mother had left behind after the divorce. The overhead light cast harsh shadows across the worn linoleum, making everything look smaller, shabier. "Sit down, please," I said, gesturing to the chairs.
I thought we could celebrate together.
Charlie slumped into his seat like he was doing me a favor. "Celebrate what exactly?" That beater outside. "Dad, it's embarrassing."
My friends see me getting out of that thing.
"Your friends don't matter," I replied, serving the meatloaf. "What matters is that it's reliable transportation." Lindsay laughed.
A sharp, cutting sound. Reliable.
"It looks like it's held together with prayers and duct tape. Richard's planning to buy me a new Mercedes for my birthday." "A Mercedes, Dad, not some junkyard special." The fork trembled slightly in my hand. I set it down, watching them pick at their food with the enthusiasm of prisoners on death row. "You know," Charlie continued, "it's hard to explain to people why our dad lives like this when our stepdad, your stepdad, isn't your father." I interrupted, my voice sharper than intended.
Nobody acts like one.
Lindsay shot back. "He provides for us. He cares about our image, our future. Look at this place, Dad. When was the last time you bought new furniture or fixed that leaky faucet?" I glanced around the kitchen at the slightly sagging cabinets, the mismatched chairs, the ancient refrigerator humming in the corner. Everything was clean, functional, but admittedly worn. During the divorce, I'd moved into this rental house while they stayed in our family home with their mother and Richard.
I live within my means, I said carefully.
"There's value in that. Value." Charlie nearly choked on his potatoes. "Dad, you work at the hardware store. You drive a car that's older than my college degree."
What kind of example is that?
The words hit like physical blows. I'd spent 30 years at that hardware store, working my way up from stockboy to assistant manager. I'd put them both through college, never missed a birthday or graduation. When their mother left me for Richard, a successful contractor with money and flash, they'd chosen sides without hesitation.
"I've always provided for you," I said quietly.
College tuition, car payments that summer in Europe for Lindsay. "That was years ago, Dad," Lindsay waved dismissively. "Richard's been supporting us since Mom married him. He bought Charlie that apartment, helped with my wedding."
"Wedding you didn't invite me to," I muttered. 'Cause you would have shown up in some thrift store suit."
"Probably driven that monstrosity." Charlie gestured toward the window. "We couldn't have that embarrassment." Something snapped inside me. The careful patience I'd cultivated over years of their dismissiveness, their casual cruelty, their complete disregard for everything I'd sacrificed for them. It cracked like ice in spring.
I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping against the floor.
"Get out!" They stared at me, forks halfway to their mouths.
I said, "Get out of here now, Dad," Lindsay started.
"Don't." My voice carried a finality that surprised even me. "Just leave. Take your opinions about my car, my house, my life, and get out." Charlie stood slowly, his face flushed with anger and surprise. "Fine, but don't come crying to us when you need help."
"I won't," I said, following them to the door.
"Trust me on that." They gathered their things in stunned silence. Lindsay paused at the threshold, her expression a mixture of shock and wounded pride.
You're making a mistake, Dad. We're the only family you have left.
I watched them climb into their expensive car, the engine purring to life with the quiet efficiency of German engineering. The tail lights disappeared around the corner, leaving me alone with the echo of their words and the weight of 30 years of accumulated resentment. The engine faded into the distance, leaving me with a silence heavier than their words. I stood at the window watching the empty street where their car had been, my hands still trembling with rage.
Beggar!
I whispered to the empty room. They called me a beggar. I moved through the kitchen mechanically, clearing the barely touched plates. The meatloaf sat congealing on the serving dish.
Hours of preparation wasted on children who saw me as nothing more than an embarrassment to be managed.
After they drove off into the night, I locked the door and sank into my chair. The house felt different now, charged with the electricity of burned bridges. I pulled out my laptop and navigated to the familiar website, entering the passwords I'd memorized years ago. The screen loaded slowly, then displayed numbers that would have shocked my children into silence. 40,000 Trenton 4 at 891.32, $40 million built, stock by stock, investment by investment, over 40 years of careful planning. It started with my first paycheck from the copper mines when I was 22. Instead of spending it on beer and entertainment like my co-workers, I bought 5 shares of IBM, then 10 shares of Coca-Cola, then more, always more,
reinvesting dividends and adding whatever I could spare.
I remembered those early years vividly, working double shifts at the mine, coming home covered in dust and exhaustion, only to spend hours researching companies, reading financial reports by lamplight. My first wife thought I was obsessed, but I knew I was building something important, something that would matter. When the mining industry collapsed but I'd already diversified. While my neighbors lost their jobs and their futures, I quietly transitioned to the hardware store and continued investing. Apple at $12 a share, Microsoft at $8, Amazon at $18, companies that seemed risky then but felt inevitable to me. The secret had been my burden and my test. I'd wanted to see who truly loved me, who would stand by me when I appeared to have nothing. Their mother had failed that test spectacularly, leaving me for Richard's flashy success. Now my children had failed it too, calling me a beggar while sitting on a fortune that dwarfed their stepfather's modest construction business. I'd planned to leave it all to them.
Every share, every dividend, every carefully cultivated dollar, but sitting in my kitchen, remembering the disgust in their voices, I felt something shift inside me.
They didn't deserve inheritance. They deserved education. I opened another browser window and began searching property records but it didn't take long to find what I was looking for. Charlie's apartment building, where he paid $1,500 a month in rent. Lindsay's duplex, where she and her husband lived for $200 monthly. Both properties were owned by Mountain View Holdings, a small real estate company that had been struggling since the pandemic. I smiled for the first time all evening. Tomorrow I would make some calls. Mountain View Holdings was about to receive an offer they couldn't refuse. "You want to see a beggar?" I murmured to the empty room. "Let me show you what real poverty looks like." I closed the laptop and headed to bed, my mind already working through the details. They'd humiliated me for the last time.
Now it was my turn to teach them about consequences.
Lying in bed, I reviewed the decades of careful choices that built my fortune, hidden from everyone, including the family who'd long dismissed me as worthless. The irony wasn't lost on me. While they'd been comparing me to their stepfather's modest success, I'd been quietly accumulating wealth that exceeded their wildest dreams. Tomorrow would bring new possibilities. Tonight I fell asleep, planning my children's first real lesson in humility. Sunlight filtered through the curtains, pulling me from a fitful sleep filled with echoes of last night's barbs. I tossed and turned for hours, their voices replaying in my mind like a broken record. Beggar, embarrassment, rust bucket. The anger had crystallized into something harder during the dark hours. Determination. I shuffled to the kitchen and fired up my old desktop computer, the fan whirring to life with familiar complaints. While it loaded, I made coffee in the same chipped mug I'd used for 20 years. The morning light streaming through my small window illuminated dust motes dancing in the air, but my focus was entirely on the screen. My brokerage account opened with its usual security prompts. I navigated to my holdings, scrolling through decades of careful selections. There, Microsoft purchased at $12, now worth over $400. Apple bought at $15, currently trading at $180. I selected several positions, enough to generate the cash I'd need for the next phase. The confirmation screen appeared.
Are you, sure you want to sell 50,000 shares of Microsoft Corporation?
I clicked confirm without hesitation. As the processing wheel spun, I sipped my coffee and let my mind drift back to the divorce. Patricia had been so confident in her choice, so certain that Richard's construction business represented security, while I was just a dreamer playing with pocket change in the stock market. She'd laughed when I'd insisted on keeping my little hobby separate from our joint assets. "You and your stocks," she'd said during one of our final arguments. "When are you going to grow up and invest in something real?" Something real?
I almost laughed now, watching the digital confirmation appear on my screen.
The sale had generated $20,000 in liquid cash, more than Richard would make in 10 lifetimes. The doorbell rang sharply, interrupting my thoughts.
I glanced at the clock. 8:30 a.m. Who would visit this early? I opened the door to find Patricia standing on my porch, her face flushed with anger, her expensive handbag clutched like a weapon. "How could you treat your own blood like that?"
she demanded, pushing past me into the house. "Charlie called me last night, crying like a child."
"You threw him out."
"Your own children." I closed the door slowly, maintaining my composure. "They're adults now, Patricia, 30 and 27 years old.
"They need to learn respect." "Respect?"
She whirled around, her voice rising. "You humiliated them. They were just trying to help you see reason about that ridiculous car purchase."
"Help me see reason." I almost smiled.
"By calling me a beggar, by comparing me to your husband, like I'm some sort of failure."
"You are a failure."
The words exploded from her. "Look at this place, William. Look at your life. You're 62 years old, living in a rental, driving a car that belongs in a scrapyard. Our children are embarrassed by you."
"Actions have consequences," I replied evenly.
"They chose to be cruel. I chose not to tolerate it." She stared at me, perhaps surprised by my calm response. "You've changed. You used to be reasonable, understanding."
"Now you're just cold." "I'm not cold, Patricia. I'm done being a doormat."
"Don't you dare blame this on me," she snapped. "I tried to make our marriage work, but you were always buried in those ridiculous financial magazines, talking about companies nobody had ever heard of. Richard understands what it means to provide for a family." "Richard," I repeated softly. "The man you had an affair with while I was working double shifts to pay for Charlie's college." Her face went white.
"That's ancient history, is it?"
"Because it seems like you're all still living in that same fantasy where I'm the villain and you're the victims." She stood there for a moment, speechless, her anger deflating into something that looked almost like uncertainty. Then she straightened, gathered her purse, and headed for the door.
"This isn't over, William."
"You've hurt your children for the last time." I watched her climb into her BMW, Richard's money no doubt, and drive away down the winding but hillside. As her tail lights disappeared around the bend, I couldn't help but think about the absurdity of it all. My 30-year-old son and 27-year-old daughter had run to their mother like children after being denied dessert. I closed the door and returned to my computer. The funds from the stock sale would be available in 3 business days. Soon, I'd show them all what real power looked like. Those next few days blurred in watchful routine, each morning starting with a glance at my inbox until the alert finally came. "Wire transfer complete. 20,000 available in your checking account." I stared at the notification for a long moment, feeling the weight of 40 years of patience and planning condensed into those simple words. The money that would change everything sat quietly in my account, waiting for my command. I grabbed my keys and headed downtown to the small real estate office, wedged between a coffee shop and a pawn store. The receptionist, a young woman with bright red hair, looked up from her computer. "I'm interested in purchasing an apartment building," I said. "The one on Granite Street, units 108, she blinked. That's a significant investment.
Are you working with a specific agent?
I'll work with whoever can close the deal quickly." 20 minutes later, I sat across from Janet Morrison, a middle-aged realtor with tired eyes and a stack of property files. She slid a folder across the desk. "Mountain View Holdings has been struggling since the pandemic," she explained. "They're motivated to sell, but they're asking $2.8 million for the building. I'll take it at that price."
No questions.
Her eyebrows shot up. "Don't you want to see the inspection reports, the rental history, the maintenance records?"
I'm familiar with the property.
I pulled out my checkbook. "How quickly can we close?" The next 2 hours passed in a blur of paperwork and phone calls. I signed documents with a steady hand, my mind occasionally drifting to the times I'd helped Charlie with his rent when he was between jobs. $3,000 here, $2,000 there, always with the promise he'd pay me back.
He never did.
Janet Morrison seemed almost dazed by the speed of the transaction. "I've never seen a cash purchase move this fast," she murmured, watching me sign the final papers.
I don't believe in wasting time, I replied.
That afternoon, I drove to the courthouse to officially record the deed. The clerk, an elderly man with thick glasses, stamped the documents with practiced efficiency. "Congratulations, Mr. Simmons. You're now the proud owner of 8 and 47 Granite Street." From there, I headed to another realtor's office across town. Lindsay's duplex was listed with a different company, but the process was remarkably similar. The owner, a widow named Mrs. Chen, had inherited the property from her husband and was eager to sell. "It's been nothing but headaches," she confessed over the phone. The evening's quiet reflection had solidified my intent, transforming yesterday's anger into today's calculated action. I opened a new message to Janet Morrison, my finger steady on the keyboard. "As the new owner of 847 Granite Street, I'm implementing immediate rent increases. Unit 4 will increase from $1,500 to $4,500 monthly, effective next month. Please notify the tenant immediately." I paused, remembering Charlie's 25th birthday when I'd quietly paid off his credit card debt. $3,000 he'd racked up on restaurants and clothes. He'd thanked me with a distracted nod, already planning his next purchase. The second email was equally brief. For the duplex property, Unit B rent increases from $1,200 to $3,600 monthly. Same timeline. Handle this discreetly. I hit send on both messages, then leaned back in my chair. The email sent. My phone rang within 2 hours. Janet Morrison's voice carried a note of concern I hadn't heard before. "Mr. Simmons, I've delivered the notices as requested, but I have to tell you, the reactions were intense. Go on," I said, setting down my coffee cup. The young man in Unit 4, Charlie, he completely lost it. Started screaming about robbery, slammed the door so hard I thought it might break. He's threatening to move out immediately. I made a non-committal sound, masking my satisfaction. "And the young woman in the duplex," Janet continued. She broke down crying, kept saying, "How can we afford this now?"
Over and over she begged me to contact the owner. Said she'd do anything to negotiate. Anything to negotiate.
I remembered Lindsay's wedding shower when I'd slipped her an envelope containing $5,000 for her honeymoon. She'd stuffed it in her purse without opening it, too busy showing off her registry gifts to Richard's wealthy friends. "These are fair market adjustments," I told Janet. "If they can't afford the new rates, they're welcome to find housing elsewhere. But Mr. Simmons tripling the rent overnight is going to cause real hardship. These young people seem genuinely desperate. They're adults. They'll figure it out." After hanging up, I walked to my kitchen window and gazed out at the Montana mountains. A neighbor was walking his dog, and I caught fragments of his conversation with another resident about the harsh new landlord who was driving out good tenants. If only they knew that harsh landlord was the quiet man they'd seen puttering around his yard for years. I opened my laptop and spent an hour researching tenant rights in Montana, ensuring my actions were completely legal. The rent increases were aggressive, but permissible with proper notice. Charlie and Lindsay would have 30 days to decide their next moves. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with a small notebook, jotting down their possible responses. They might appeal to their mother and stepfather for help. They might try to negotiate directly with the mysterious owner, or they might come crawling back to their beggar father, finally ready to show some respect. I smiled, thinking about the irony. They'd spent years comparing me unfavorably to Richard, praising his business acumen and success. Now they discover what real financial pressure felt like, courtesy of investments that predated their stepfather's entire career. The phone rang again. Janet Morrison sounding even more frazzled. "Mr. Simmons, I hope you don't mind me calling so late, but there's been a development." The young man, Charlie, he came back to the office this afternoon with some kind of lawyer friend. They're trying to challenge the rent increase, claiming it's retaliatory. Retaliatory against what?
That's what I asked.
They couldn't give me a straight answer. The lawyer seemed to realize their case was weak and left pretty quickly. I listened as she described the chaos, Charlie's red-faced accusations, Lindsay's phone calls pleading for mercy, the lawyer's embarrassed retreat when he realized the increases were technically legal. "They're both convinced someone has it out for them personally," Janet added. "The young woman keeps asking who bought the properties, but I told her that information is confidential." "Keep it that way," I instructed. After ending the call, I stared at my phone as it began buzzing with an incoming message. The screen showed Lindsay's name, and I could see the beginning of what looked like a desperate text. My finger paused over the answer button, curiosity wearing with the satisfaction of letting them stew in their panic. The phone's persistent vibration broke the afternoon hush, a message from Lindsay flashing urgently on the screen. "Dad, please call me. We need to talk. It's really important." I set the phone aside briefly to compose myself, the lingering buzz echoing the realtor's report from the previous evening. Whatever desperation had driven her to reach out, I wanted to savor it for a moment before responding. An hour later, their car pulled up outside. Not the sleek sedan from before, but an older Honda that must have belonged to Lindsay's husband. They knocked frantically, the sound sharp and insistent against my front door. I opened it to find them both standing on my porch, their faces etched with worry and barely contained panic. Lindsay's eyes were red-rimmed, her makeup smudged. Charlie's jaw was clenched so tight I could see the muscles twitching.
"Dad," Lindsay began, her voice trembling.
"We're in real trouble. Our rent just tripled overnight and we don't know what to do." "Please," Charlie added, though the words seemed to scrape his throat raw. "We need your help. Just a loan until we can figure this out." I gestured them inside reluctantly, crossing my arms as they settled uneasily on my worn couch. The same couch they'd mocked just days earlier now seemed like a throne of judgment.
"You want money from me?" I asked, my voice carefully neutral. "Dad, please," Lindsay pressed on, tears starting to flow. "We're desperate."
"The new landlord won't negotiate, won't even tell us who he is. We could lose our homes." "You've called me a beggar before," I replied, shaking my head slowly. "Handle it yourselves," Charlie's facade cracked.
I was right then.
"You are one." "Fine, we'll just go to Mom and our stepdad."
"They'll help us."
"They actually care about family." "Yes," Lindsay chimed in, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "Richard would never let us suffer like this. He understands what it means to support the people you love." I paced to the window, looking out at the street where their borrowed car sat like a monument to their reduced circumstances. The irony was delicious. They were so busy planning their escape to Richard that they couldn't see the trap closing around them. "So go to Richard," I said, simply ask him for $3,600 a month for Lindsay, $4,500 for Charlie every month. See how long his generosity lasts.
"That's not the point," Charlie exploded, jumping to his feet.
"You're our father. You should want to help us."
"Help you with what?" "Living beyond your means. Spending money you don't have on things you don't need."
"We don't spend money we don't have," Lindsay protested, but her voice lacked conviction.
"Really?" I turned back to face them. "Charlie, what did you spend last month on restaurants?"
"Lindsay, how much was that purse you carried to dinner last week?" They exchanged glances and I saw the truth in their expressions. They'd been living like wealthy people on working-class incomes, subsidized by their stepfather's occasional large and their own denial. "That's different," Charlie muttered. "Is it? You mock my modest life, call me an embarrassment, then come running here when your fantasy lifestyle hits reality."
As I spoke, my eyes fell on a small wooden box on my mantel.
A childhood craft project Lindsay had made in elementary school, painted with bright flowers and the words, "Best Dad Ever." The innocent little girl who'd created that treasure had grown into this desperate woman sitting on my couch, too proud to admit her mistakes, but not too proud to beg for money. "We're sorry about the other night," Lindsay said quietly.
We didn't mean to hurt your feelings. My feelings?
I almost laughed. "You think this is about hurt feelings?" "Then what is it about?" Charlie demanded. "Respect," I said. "Something you've never shown me." They sat in tense silence, the weight of years of casual cruelty settling between us like dust. Finally, Charlie stood up, his face flushed with anger and wounded pride. "Fine, we'll figure it out ourselves, but don't expect us to come crawling back when you're old and need help." "I won't," I replied calmly. As Charlie stormed toward the door, his parting shot reminded me of all the times I'd swallowed their slights. But no longer would I let that define our relationship. Lindsay followed, pausing at the threshold to look back at me with something that might have been regret.
This isn't over, Dad, she said softly.
I watched their car disappear down the street, my mind already turning to their next moves. They'd go to Patricia and Richard now, hat in hand, begging for rescue. Soon they'd discover that their stepfather's generosity had limits, and their mother's influence could only stretch so far. As their headlights dissolved into the gathering dusk, a heavy quiet settled over the house, broken only by my steady breaths, as I contemplated their inevitable backlash. I secured the door with deliberate care and settled into my armchair, the residual tension from their parting words still crackling in the air like electricity before a storm. I didn't have to wait long to see their strategy unfold. Over the following days, whispers began circulating through Bates' tight-knit community like poison in a well. Mrs. Henderson from next door mentioned it first, her voice carefully neutral as she tended her garden. "Such a shame about your family troubles, William."
I hope you can work things out.
At the coffee shop on Main Street, I overheard fragments of conversation from the corner booth where Lindsay sat with her friend Sarah, tissues crumpled in her hands. "He just cut us off completely," she was saying, her voice breaking with practiced precision. "After everything we've done for him, trying to help him see reason about his finances." The lies were elegant in their simplicity. They painted me as the cruel father who'd abandoned his struggling children, while they became the victims of my heartless indifference. No mention of their mockery, their years of dismissiveness, their endless comparisons to their stepfather. Charlie's approach was more direct. Anonymous notes began appearing in my mailbox. Nothing threatening enough to involve police, but pointed enough to make their message clear. "This won't end well for you," read one typed message.
Family is everything, said another.
The phone calls came next. Unknown numbers, silence when I answered. I remembered 13-year-old Charlie asking if he could change his last name to Richards, and 15-year-old Lindsay refusing to visit because my apartment was too depressing. I reached for my phone and dialed the only lawyer in but I trusted, Frank Morrison, Janet's brother, who'd handled my property purchases with discretion. "William, what can I do for you?"
I need advice on a frivolous lawsuit.
"My ex-wife and children are claiming emotional distress." Frank's chuckle was dry.
Let me guess. They want money.
"They want me to resume financial support. I never legally owed them in the first place." "Bring me the papers."
This sounds like pure harassment.
I decided to clear my head with a drive into town. At the grocery store, I was loading bags into my Chevrolet when Tom Bradley approached, his expression uncomfortable. "Hey, William. Look, I hate to bring this up, but people are talking about you and your kids." "What are they saying, Tom?"
That you threw them out of their homes.
"That you're being vindictive because they're successful and you're well a failure."
I finished. Is that what they're saying?
Tom's face reamed.
I'm just telling you what's going around. Maybe you should talk to them. Work something out.
"Tom," I said, closing my trunk with deliberate calm, "sometimes the truth isn't what people want to hear." That evening, Frank called with news that shifted everything. "I've been doing some research on your son, Charlie. I'll send you the details, but I think you might want to consult with a private investigator.
I know someone discreet. He gave me a name and number.
Detective Ray Sullivan retired from the Butte Police Department, now working private cases. I held the card in my palm, feeling its sharp edges as I considered the implications. My children had chosen to escalate this conflict, dragging our family drama into the courts and the community. Perhaps it was time to respond in kind, the lawyer's words still ringing in my ears. The persistent resolve against my family's assaults solidifying into something harder, more focused. "Sullivan Investigations," came the growly voice. "Mr. Sullivan, Frank Morrison referred me."
I need someone investigated discreetly.
"I can meet you tomorrow evening. Beartooth Park by the old pavilion." 7 night. The next evening I drove to the outskirts under cover of early fog. Ray Sullivan was exactly what I had expected. Weathered face, careful eyes, the kind of man who'd spent decades reading people's secrets. "What are we looking for?" he asked, settling onto the park bench beside me. "My son Charlie works at Mountain States Insurance. I suspect he's been cutting corners, maybe padding expense accounts, falsifying reports. His character suggests he'd take shortcuts if he thought that he could get away with it." Sullivan nodded, pulling out a small notebook.
How deep do you want me to dig?
"Deep enough to find the truth. Nothing more, nothing less." 2 weeks later, the detective's report arrived in a plain manila envelope. I spread the contents across my kitchen table, reviewing each document with meticulous care. Charlie's employment file painted a picture of escalating dishonesty, fabricated mileage reports, inflated client dinner receipts, even a few instances of claiming overtime for hours he'd never worked. Evidence confirmed. Sifting through the detective's dossier, I saw echoes of Charlie's lifelong shortcuts, from skipping chores as a boy to these professional deceptions solidifying my path forward. The receipt for a supposed client dinner at a restaurant that had been closed for renovations reminded me of 16-year-old Charlie claiming he'd spent his allowance on school supplies when I'd later found video game receipts in his backpack. I hesitated for perhaps 30 seconds, remembering the child who'd once helped me wash my car for pocket money. Then I recalled his voice on the phone. "This won't end well for you, old man." I typed the anonymous email, carefully attaching scanned copies of the evidence. "Your employee, Charlie Simmons, has been systematically defrauding your company. Documentation attached."
A concerned citizen.
The message sent with a soft electronic chime. I sealed additional copies in an envelope addressed to Mountain States Insurance's corporate headquarters, adding a cover letter detailing the pattern of fraud. My hands were gloved. Old habits from years of careful investing where anonymity sometimes mattered. Within a week, the news filtered through Butt's gossip network. Charlie had been terminated from Mountain States' insurance effective immediately. The official reason was violation of company policies, but the rumors were more colorful. "They found out he was stealing," Mrs. Henderson whispered over her fence. "Caught him red-handed with fake receipts." I listened to her theories with the same neutral expression I'd worn for 40 years of family gatherings. When she asked what I thought, I simply said, "Actions have consequences." A day later, I caught a social media post from one of Lindsay's friends. "Prayers for the Simmons family during this difficult time. Sometimes life just hits you from all sides." I noted Lindsay's rising desperation through that snippet, my thoughts drifting to her vulnerabilities. She'd always been the more emotional of my children, quicker to crack under pressure. Charlie's job loss would terrify her, making her wonder if she was next. The question was, what secrets was she hiding? I closed my laptop and walked to my window, watching the Montana sky darken over the mountains. Phase 2 of my education program was complete. Soon, it would be time to begin Phase 3. The snippet about Lindsay's frantic posts lingered in my mind as I booted up the computer, fingers poised over keys, ready to tilt the scales further. The evening's reflections on Charlie's downfall had shifted my focus to Lindsay, and the lingering glow of my screen mirrored my growing resolve. If Charlie was the brute force of their partnership, Lindsay was the subtle manipulator, which meant her downfall required a different approach. I pulled up the detective's second report, the one I'd commissioned specifically on Lindsay's real estate practices. Ray Sullivan had been thorough documenting a pattern of client deceptions that would make any ethical realtor cringe. Property valuations inflated by 20%, foundation cracks concealed with strategic furniture placement, water damage hidden behind fresh paint and creative staging. The evidence was damning: forged inspection reports, altered property histories, even testimonials from clients who discovered problems months after closing. One elderly couple had bought a house with a compromised roof that Lindsay had assured them was recently renovated. The repair costs had wiped out their savings. Post-sent, I uploaded the files to 3 anonymous review sites, each post carefully crafted to appear organic, a concerned citizen sharing documented evidence of fraud. The forums accepted the submissions instantly. My IP address masked through layers of encryption Rye had helped me set up. Next, I compiled email addresses from Lindsay's client files, sending each person a carefully worded message. You may want to investigate your realtor's practices. Documentation attached. The evidence spoke for itself. No editorial commentary needed. Within hours, reactions poured in swiftly. But the real estate community was small and word traveled fast. My phone buzzed with emergency notifications from local news sites picking up the story. I slipped on a hat and drove across town incognito, parking outside Lindsay's office, where I could observe the chaos firsthand. Through the window, I watched her pacing frantically, her phone pressed to her ear.
No, Mrs. Patterson, I can't explain.
Yes, I understand you're upset, but the call ended abruptly. I could see her shoulders shaking. Another client stormed into the office, his voice carrying through the glass. You've ruined my investment. That foundation you swore was solid is cracking down the middle. Lindsay's attempts at damage control only made things worse. Her social media posts defending her practices came across as defensive and hollow. These are baseless accusations from anonymous sources, she wrote. I've always acted with integrity. The comments section exploded with rebuttals from verified clients, each sharing their own horror stories. As the first client review went viral in our small town, I pictured Lindsay's face crumpling just as mine had during their endless taunts, a quiet justice finally taking shape. At the weekly town meeting, I sat in the back row as angry homeowners shared their stories. The mayor called for an investigation into local real estate practices. The state licensing board had already received formal complaints. Within a week, Lindsay's office was empty. The ferent sign in the window told the story better than any news article could. That evening, I found myself walking Butt's quiet streets, breathing in the crisp Montana air. The detective's work had been precise and devastating. Lindsay's reputation was destroyed, her career finished. Like Charlie, she'd learned that actions truly had consequences. As I turned onto my street, I noticed a stack of mail waiting in my box. Bills, advertisements, and something that made me pause. An official envelope with the seal of the Butt County Court. Inside, a bankruptcy filing notice with a familiar name, Charles William Simmons. My eyes narrowed on the court notice, calculating the timing. The hearing was scheduled for next Friday. Both of my children would be there, desperate and cornered. It would be the perfect stage for the final act of my education program. The bankruptcy notice stared up from the envelope, its formal script pulling me into the next phase as I prepared for the inevitable courtroom face-off. I set aside Lindsay's updates to address this new development, the shared thread of my children's financial collapse. Weaving everything together with poetic precision, I gathered my files and drove to the courthouse under grey skies, arriving early to observe the proceedings from the back row. The Butt County Courthouse smelled of old wood and decades of legal drama, its high ceilings echoing with whispered conversations. Charlie sat at the petitioner's table, his lawyer shuffling papers with the resigned air of someone managing an inevitable loss. His fingers drummed nervously against the wood, and I could see sweat beating on his forehead despite the cool morning air. Lindsay had come to support him, her presence a testament to their continued alliance against the world. She kept glancing around the room anxiously, as if expecting more bad news to materialize from the shadows. The judge, a stern woman in her 50s, reviewed the bankruptcy petition with practiced efficiency. Mr. Simmons, you're claiming debts exceeding $150,000 with assets of less than $30,000. Yes, Your Honor, Charlie replied, his voice barely above a whisper. And your primary creditor is listed as unknown property owner for back rent. This was my moment. I rose from my seat, documents in hand, feeling the weight of decades lift with each step toward the front of the courtroom. Your Honor, I can clarify that matter. The room fell silent. Charlie's head snapped around, his eyes widening as recognition dawned.
I'm the landlord you've cursed, I announced, my voice carrying clearly through the sudden hush, and my accounts hold $40 million.
Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Charlie's mouth opened and closed like a fish struggling for air.
This can't be, he stammered, half rising from his chair.
I handed the court clerk my property deeds, bank statements, and eviction papers. I own both properties where my children live. Given their continued harassment and threats, I'm initiating immediate eviction proceedings. The judge examined the documents with raised eyebrows. Mr. Simmons, the elder Mr. Simmons, these appear to be in order. The bankruptcy filing becomes irrelevant if you're the primary creditor. Dad, Lindsay's voice cracked like a whip. You can't do this to us. Handing over the proofs, I felt the weight of decades lift. Each figure on the statement a testament to the patience that now delivered this irreversible blow. The judge's gavel fell with sharp finality. Petition denied. Immediate eviction granted. Court adjourned. The courtroom erupted in murmurs and shifting papers. Charlie sat frozen, staring at the bank statements that showed more money than he'd ever imagined his beggar father could possess. $40 million? He whispered. You had $40 million, and you let us mock me, humiliate me, call me a failure, I finished. Yes, I did. I wanted to see who you really were. Lindsay was crying now, her carefully applied makeup streaking down her cheeks. We're your children.
How could you do this to your own blood? I gave you every opportunity to show respect, to demonstrate the character that would have made you worthy heirs.
Instead, you chose cruelty. The bailiff approached with the official eviction notice. You have 72 hours to vacate the premises. As I walked toward the courthouse exit, I heard footsteps behind me. My children were following, their earlier confidence replaced by desperate pleading, but I kept walking, my back straight, my mind already turning to the quiet satisfaction of justice finally served. Their voices faded as I pushed through the heavy courthouse doors, stepping into the Montana afternoon, where the mountain air had never tasted sweeter. Their shadows lengthened on the courthouse stone as they hurried toward me, faces etched with a mix of fear and feigned remorse that I had long anticipated. I straightened my coat against the chill wind, carrying their whispered urgencies, the unresolved courtroom tension lingering in my posture as I prepared for what I knew would be their final gambit.
Dad, wait! Lindsay called out, her heels clicking frantically against the pavement.
Please, we need to talk. I paused at the courthouse steps, watching them approach with the desperation of drowning swimmers reaching for a life preserver. Their earlier arrogance had crumbled, replaced by the raw panic of people who'd finally grasped the magnitude of their mistakes. Charlie reached me first, his face pale and drawn.
Dad, we're so sorry.
We didn't know. We never realized you had $40 million, I finished calmly.
No, you didn't know because you were too busy mocking me to notice.
Without warning, they both dropped to their knees on the courthouse steps, their expensive clothes scraping against the rough stone. The public display drew stares from passing pedestrians, but they were beyond caring about appearances.
Now Lindsay sobbed, her mascara streaming down her cheeks.
We'll change. We promise. We'll be better children. Charlie's voice cracked as he spoke. We were wrong about everything. The car, the house, the way we talked to you. We're begging you.
Don't do this to us.
They knelt before me, invoking childhood memories with calculated desperation. Lindsay pulled out a small wooden heart I'd carved for her in elementary school, holding it up like a peace offering. Remember when you made this for me? You said it would always keep us connected.
We're still your children, Dad. We're still family.
Watching them scramble for words that once cut deep, I felt the chains of obligation dissolve, replaced by a freedom earned through years of unseen fortitude. The heart in Lindsay's hand reminded me of all the sacrifices they'd dismissed, all the love they'd rejected in favor of their stepfather's flashier offerings.
It's too late for that, I said firmly, stepping back from their grasping hands.
You've shown your true colors. The money doesn't change what you are.
But we'll pay rent, Charlie pleaded.
We'll get jobs. We'll know more. I turned away from them, their pleas fading like distant thunder as I walked toward my car. I drove back through familiar streets, their desperate voices echoing in my memory. By the time I reached my house, the eviction process was already in motion. My phone buzzed with updates from the property management company. Both properties are being secured. Janet Morrison reported, the tenants have 72 hours to remove their belongings. Over the next 3 days, I watched from a distance as my children's lives unraveled completely. Charlie's unemployment left him scrambling for any work he could find, but his reputation preceded him now. Lindsay's real estate license was suspended pending investigation, her former clients filing lawsuits for fraud and misrepresentation. The eviction officers arrived precisely on schedule. Through intermediaries, I heard about their frantic packing, the neighbors gathering to watch the spectacle, the moving truck filled with furniture they'd have to sell to pay for temporary housing. Their luxury cars were the first to go, repossessed when they couldn't make the payments. Designer clothes, expensive electronics, all the status symbols they'd once flaunted were sacrificed to pawn shops and online sales. Charlie ended up in a weekly rate motel on the outskirts of town, his pride finally broken. Lindsay couch surfed between friends, each stay growing shorter as her welcome wore thin. The phone rang one evening as I was reading in my armchair. Patricia's voice was tight with barely controlled rage.
You've destroyed them, William. Are you satisfied now?
I didn't destroy them, I replied calmly.
I simply stopped enabling their destruction of themselves.
They're your children. They stopped being my children the moment they chose contempt over love. The moment they decided Richard was more valuable than the man who actually raised them. She hung up without another word. The eviction confirmation call came the next morning, the agent's voice crisp and professional. Both properties are now vacant and available for rental. What are your instructions? I sat down the phone and moved to my desk where my stock portfolios glowed on the computer screen. The numbers represented more than money now. They represented freedom, possibility, a chance to build something new from the ashes of what had been. The eviction agent's voice still fresh in my ear, I turned to the glowing screen, ready to reshape the remnants of my old life into something unbound. I pocketed the phone after the call and settled at my desk, anchored by the fresh sense of finality from my children's pleas still echoing in my memory. I opened my investment app and began the systematic process of liquidation. Not everything. I'd learned too much about the power of compound interest to abandon it entirely, but enough to fund the next chapter of my life. Mr. Simmons. My broker's voice was professionally warm when I called. What can I do for you today? I want to sell 30% of my portfolio. Blue chip stocks diversified across sectors. I need the funds liquid within a week. That's quite a substantial amount. May I ask what you're planning? A new life, I said simply. Sold. The transfers completed with digital efficiency.
Millions flowing into my accounts like water finding its level.
I listed both rental properties with new management companies, screening potential tenants who would actually appreciate what they were getting. The monthly rental income would provide a steady stream without the emotional baggage of my children's occupancy. My own house but required minimal staging. I'd kept it clean and functional for so long that it showed beautifully to potential buyers. The first offer came within a week. A young family with children who saw the home's potential rather than its modest appointments. That evening, I browsed oceanfront properties online, the screen illuminating possibilities I'd never allowed myself to imagine. California beckoned with its promise of renewal, its distance from everything that had defined my previous life. I boarded the plane with light luggage, but shrinking below me as we climbed into the sky. The coastal town of Carmel welcomed me with salt air and endless horizons, a stark contrast to Montana's enclosed valleys. The house I bought sat on a bluff overlooking the Pacific, its windows framing sunsets that painted the sky in colors I'd forgotten existed. The real estate agent, a woman named Margaret, with kind eyes and silver hair, handled the closing with the efficiency of someone who'd seen dreams realized before. "You picked a wonderful spot," she said, handing me the keys. "The community here is very welcoming."
Nas, she was right.
At the local community center's evening lecture series, I met Eleanor, a widow who'd moved to Carmel after her husband's death 3 years earlier. We struck up a conversation about books, then walks along the beach, then dinners overlooking the water. "I raise 3 children," she told me one evening as we watched the waves crash below my deck. "I visit twice a year."
Beautiful but distant.
"I've learned that family isn't always about blood." "What is it about then?" I asked. "Respect, kindness, the choice to see value in someone beyond what they can provide." Standing on the deck with her beside me, I marveled at how the ocean's vastness mirrored the expanse of possibilities unlocked by standing firm against those who once diminished me. The lessons from my investment beginnings post-divorce. Patience, persistence, the power of compound growth had applied to more than just money. We walked the beach most evenings, our conversations flowing as easily as the tide. She'd been a teacher, understood the satisfaction of nurturing something worthwhile. I found myself sharing stories of my investing journey, the years of careful accumulation that had led to this moment of freedom.
You know, Eleanor said one sunset-painted evening, "I think you've been investing in yourself all along."
The money was just the vehicle. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Probably one of my children trying a new approach. I glanced at it, then deleted it without reading, my attention returning to the horizon where tomorrow's possibilities waited. The waves crashed in their eternal rhythm, and I realized I'd finally found what I'd been investing in all these years. Not just financial security, but the self-respect to walk away from toxicity and the wisdom to recognize genuine connection when it appeared. As the sun dipped below the Pacific, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, I felt a contentment I'd never known was possible. The future stretched ahead, unbound by the expectations of ungrateful children or the ghosts of past disappointments.
I was free.
If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left.